Hey guys, I just want to preface this video by saying that this content is pretty new to me, so please note I'm not a professional reviewer nor am I a professional musician. I'm just a guy that likes listening to music and talking about it. This is why I want to present my thoughts on artists that I'm interested in and how to get into their discography, and that means you get to see more of my beautiful face. So this is how this series is going to work, at least in my mind, is that I'm going to go into a little backstory about the artist we are discussing, specifically for this episode, Mac Miller, and then I'll list some tracks that I believe that should be checked out prior to listening to a full-length LP, just to give you guys an idea of the kind of music that he creates, kind of vibe, see if you're interested. Then I'll do a mini review of each album that will be discussed, and finally I'll present a path for you, the lovely viewer, to listen to. Of course, as always, everything is just my personal opinion, and feel free to agree or disagree with my takes on each album. I want to promote discussion more than anything, so please feel free to leave a comment down below about anything I mentioned in this video. Malcolm James McCormick, also more popularly known as Mac Miller, was an American singer, songwriter, and producer from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where you can also find items such as steel and... Mac Miller's music can be described as jazz rap, neo-soul, pop rap, and R&B. Mac Miller was an artist that was known heavily for his unique vocal style as well as his expressive lyrics that delve into a wide range of topics including depression, drugs, love, sex, you name it. Mac Miller, as many know, tragically passed away in 2018, leaving much of his work unfinished. Although his last full-length LP, Circles, was released posthumously just this year. Mac Miller was a troubled and expressive person, one whose words and music spoke to many, myself included, which is why I want to explain how you, the viewer, can get into his vast and interesting discography. For simplicity's sake, I'm only going to discuss his full-length LPs within this video, although he has a multitude of mixtapes and similar side projects, such as Faces, released in 2014, and honestly, everyone should check out. One of the best mixtapes ever, in my opinion. As well as KIDS, also known as Kids, released in 2010, and was largely considered his breakthrough into the music industry. To get a more surface-level understanding of Mac Miller's music, I would highly recommend a few singles to start, including Dang, a groovy R&B style track with a feature from Anderson .Paak, Good News, a vulnerable and powerful yet minimalist track that highlights Mac's ability to get intimate and real with his lyrical content, and Ladders, a bright, catchy, and lyrically metaphorical track of swimming. So now let's get into his full-length LPs, of which we'll be going through chronologically. First, and quite possibly the worst, we have Blue Slide Park, which was released in 2011. Mac's debut full-length album, I feel it does a poor job of representing his discography. It's almost quite funny looking back at this album and seeing how much Mac has grown, not just as a musician and songwriter, but as a person as well. The lyrical content, to put it bluntly, is quite obnoxious. Mac constantly talks about the types of things that really only get white frat dudes excited, drugs, women, money, and there isn't really much more complexity than that. There's very little depth, nuance, or complexity in almost every song on this record. It feels like Mac says nothing of actual substance. This record is very safe also. It doesn't really fluctuate both in a music theory sense as well as just like a lyrical sense. If I took a shot every time a song was in 4/4, I would probably be dead. The actual production of this album is also incredibly weak in comparison to the rest of his work. The mix is lazy and contrived with very little depth to it. The instrumentals are dull and left me rather uninterested throughout the record. Although some of Mac's line delivery is kind of quirky and fun, there isn't much more than that to be desired within this. Regardless of the many negatives of this album, which there are plenty, it is an important part of Mac's discography as it truly shows his artistic development with records to come and how he attempts to fix the problems that are so evident on this record. Favorite tracks on this record would probably be Party on Fifth Avenue and One Last Thing. So after Blue Slide Park, we have Watching Movies with the Sound Off, released in 2013. Watching Movie with the Sound Off is a highly experimental album by nature. Mac with this album wanted to create an atmosphere that was almost cinematic, trying to create a vast and open production that resembled the title of the work, Watching Movies with the Sound Off. The production, because of this, has a certain eccentricity to it, with interesting use of synths and distortion, with much of the beats to create this sort of antique feel to the album. This album is certainly one of Mac's most sonically interesting releases, with engaging contrasts between tracks and a variety of influences and styles being represented. This album feels hectic and all over the place, yet at the same time has a level of cohesion that allows the record to flow smoothly and still kind of get the sense of watching movies with the sound off. Additionally, Mack's actual rap performance has a lot more interesting and abstract styles that shows his virtuosity as a performer, although some of his performances can be seen as a bit extra and almost annoying, with some of his inflections kind of break the experience at times. One other criticism that I personally have is, while the atmosphere is interesting for the most part, there are times where the album seems to kind of drag you on with these long tracks, and you kind of just want a certain idea to end or move on, yet it kind of just keeps going. Overall, though, this is an interesting and experimental project for Mac Miller that can be seen as one of his first albums that show his desire to change both musically and personally. My favorite tracks on this are SCS, Objects in the Mirror, and Someone Like You. After this record, we have Good AM, released in 2015. Good AM, in my opinion, is Mac's most cohesive album. Much of the overall vibe of this record is preserved throughout the record. It is a unique and well-produced rap album on every front. But what is most special about this album is the ethos surrounding it. On this album are some of Mac's best bars, best verses, best flows. With this album, he proved to everyone that he wasn't just some lame frat boy style rapper that could only rap over the most generic beats. His rapping style within this album is incredibly varied, with his diction way more precise and way more concise than previous records. Additionally, within this record, he begins to delve into more serious and deep topics compared to his previous works. Much of his performance feels genuine and fits the overall atmosphere of the record very well. Although some of his lyrical content can leave much to be desired at times, some of the cheesy lyrics that he was criticized for in earlier projects are still present to a certain extent. But this album signifies growth for Mac Miller's performer. This album, Mac proves he could solidify himself as a rapper with words that are worth listening to. My favorite tracks off of this are Two Matches, Weekend, and ROS. After that, we have The Divine Feminine, released in 2016. The Divine Feminine is Mac's attempt to make an album more centered around love and romance, and much of the lyrical content reflects that. However, compared to the more previously discussed works, the lyrical content doesn't feel as cohesive and deep compared to his later works. Much of the lyrics come out as cheesy and at times even a bit arrogant, bragging about his sex life in an unoriginal and boring way. Basically, he's just like, hey guys, I'm Mac and I fuck. Like, that's pretty much it. However, what is most redeemable about this album is the R&B neo-soul inspiration that I think is executed very, very well. Throughout the course of this album, Mac has interesting and varied instrumentation and beats that really add to the atmosphere of the record and highlight these themes of love and affection. There are certainly low points within the record, where many of these beats are pretty generic and just sound like your standard run-of-the-mill, or in this case, run-of-the-miller, rapper trying to sound pop. Regardless, this is overall a pretty fun album. The grooves are catchy, especially in the first half, and I especially love the R&B influence on this record. My favorite tracks on this record are Dang, Cinderella, and God is Fair, Sexy is Nasty. Next up, we have Swimming, released in 2018. Swimming is one of Mac's most intimate projects, as much of the lyrical content deals with his mental state and the problems that come with that. However, on this album, there appears to be a lot of interesting contrast between this dark and introspective lyrical content with the instrumentation, with some songs being rather funky and catchy, which seem to juxtapose the words that Mac is saying. Notable example of this is in the track What's the Use, where the bass is brought out heavily in the mix, and this funky and sharp bass line kind of drives the track forward. The contrast seems to add a kind of cheery yet nihilistic aspect to Mac's emotions. It feels like Mac has accepted his flaws and his negative emotions, and this theme of acceptance is shown throughout the album. One criticism that some have with this album is that Mac's singing isn't entirely realized within this album. At times his vocal delivery seems off, and his diction and voice may be off-putting. I personally disagree with this sentiment, but that's kind of personal preference. However, I will agree that his vocal performance is certainly better on other records. Overall, though, this is an incredibly solid album with interesting production, deep and personal lyrics, and unique songwriting. My personal favorite tracks are Come Back to Earth, Self-Care, Ladders, and 2009. We are ending Mac's discography with Circles, his most recent posthumous album released this year in 2020. This is, in my opinion, Mac's magnum opus. The raw level of emotional expression that Mack is able to achieve with this album is nearly unmatched. This feels like the album that Mack has been wanting to make. Circles is tragic, beautiful, warm, inviting, but most importantly of all, it's entirely Mac Miller. The concept of posthumous albums and their ethical implications is a debate for another time, but I feel like if any posthumous album is done right, I believe it's this one. The context of Mack's passing with the release of Circles is impossible to ignore. I was almost brought to tears the first time I listened to it. Instrumentation on this album is dense and lush, with the production incredibly rich and full, much to the credit of producer John Bryan, who aided with finishing this album after Mack's death. There's such interesting contrast between emotions and even genres within this album, such as the difference between tracks such as Blue World, a seemingly traditional hip-hop song with impressive production and performance, discussing his personal struggles in life in an engaging, captivating way, compared to Everybody, a minimalist piano ballad that was inspired by Everybody's Gotta Live, made by psychedelic rock artist Arthur Lee. Circles is everything you want in a Mac Miller album. It's everything, every bit real, every bit catchy, every bit inspiring. It's almost perfect, in my opinion. My favorite tracks on that album are Blue World, Good News, and Hand Me Downs. Now that we've done a quick little mini review of each album, let's discuss what album order you should listen to in order to have the best experience with Mack's discography that you can. So you can discover what you like, what you hate, and what you can get out of his music. So I believe that a good starting point, regardless of your personal music taste, is Circles. It is his most diverse, unique, and overall the highest quality out of all Mack's albums, easily for me. At this point, I kind of see a three-way path you can take with Mack's albums after Circles. If you like the emotional connection you felt during Circles and want a Mack album that fulfills that need for pathos and personal connection, a good next album would be Swimming. If you like the hip-hop elements and like Mack's rapping style, a good next album would definitely be Good AM. If you like Circles but want to hear a more experimental and concept-driven album, I would recommend Watching Movies with the Sound Off. Within those three albums, you can listen to them in whichever order you would like, and then afterwards, if you'd really like to hear the rest of what Mack has to offer, I would say listen to The Divine Feminine. Honestly, I would really only listen to Blue Slide Park. If you really want a good grasp of Mac Miller's progression as an artist, for me at least, it has very little artistic value other than that. Well, that does it for this episode. Did you like the format? Do you want to see more of this? If you want to see more of this, tell me what artists I should do next. Leave a comment down below, and I'll take all those comments into consideration. Thank you, everyone. Subscribe to stay tuned for more content from me, and I'll see you guys next time.